Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Welcome. How is everybody enjoying this weather? I know not everyone loves the cold and the rain. Some of us will take the cold even if it means a little rain. So I'm going to talk this morning about first. We all experience things for the first time in life at some point. My dad loved to go on walks when we were growing up, and one day some of my cousins and uncles and I were all taking a walk. And it was that beautiful time of day where it's sunset and you see all the beautiful colors. And it goes into twilight, where it's just before the sun sets and gets dark. And we're walking along, and all of a sudden, about 2 streets over, a car backfires. Well, one of my uncles, sweetest, most lovely person you've ever met, just the kindest, gentlest man, all of a sudden he snaps and turns into a different person. He's intense, he looks frenzied, and in his eyes he looked like he was somewhere else. And he starts yelling at my dad and my other uncles, "Get the women and the children into shelter." And we're going, "What women?" What's happening right now? And he starts running down the road and he's yelling all these instructions to my uncles, all these tactical maneuvers. And he's been in combat, so none of them had been. So no one knows what he's talking about. And one of my uncles calls after him, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to get Charlie." And I look at my dad and I say, "Daddy, who's Charlie?" Well, this was quite a few years ago. And a lot of people didn't know what PTSD was at that point. And do we know what that stands for? Anyone? PTSD? Post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, it's not just one gender that's hit by it. It's everybody. It hits men and women equally. And we hear about it a lot of times in terms of combat, but it affects both men and women, whether they've been in combat or not. And I have some of these blanked out because online you can't say certain things. But the number one cause for men and women is, we will call it, unwanted intimacy. For women, the number 2 is unwanted intimate touch. And then we go into things like combat, childhood neglect, being assaulted with a weapon, childhood trauma. So combat is high on the list for men, but not as much for women because there's more men in combat than women. And some of the symptoms of this include intrusion, which means you may have flashbacks, nightmares, or intrusive memories, which are memories they overcome you. You can't control them, you can't stop them, and they affect your daily living. You can avoid people or places that bring on these feelings. Like if a person has PTSD from a near drowning, maybe they'll avoid bodies of water. People can be hypervigilant and hyperstimulated, and maybe they scare easily. I have a friend, if you come up on him and you scare him, he'll probably half kill you. He doesn't mean to, it's just he's experiencing these. And then there's also changes in mood, maybe loss of interest in things that you used to be highly interested in, maybe unable to trust others. Now, the nearest way I can describe how you feel when you are experiencing PTSD is, if you can imagine when you're a child, if you're in a dark room, you're watching a scary movie, and all of a sudden, maybe one of your lovely siblings or a cousin decides to be cute and they make a loud sound or come up and grab you from behind. And what happens in that moment? You are there. Whatever is in that movie is coming for you. Johnny is here, he's coming for you. And you are overcome with that and you're experiencing that. So that's the closest way I can describe that. There are things that happen to you with PTSD. Maybe you have overall negative thinking, or you can have a negative mood swing that comes on you a lot. You can be always on guard. Some people that are gentle and kind can become very aggressive. And They act not like themselves. And it also affects children. It's not just adults. In children, we can see difficulty with school, concentrating in school. Maybe they have depression, they isolate from their friends, or drug use. A lot of times even adults or children can get into drug use because it numbs those feelings of anxiety or panic. With PTSD, about 8 million Americans have been diagnosed with PTSD. And about 37%, almost 40% of those diagnosed with it have severe forms that really affects their day-to-day living. And from 2000 to 2015, about 140,000 service military personnel were diagnosed with it. So those are pretty big numbers. So what happens? We have a stressor that hits you. It activates this PTSD, and different people have different triggers. With my uncle, his trigger was around sunset and twilight because that's when sharpshooters would start picking them off. Because then when they pursued them, they could escape into the dark. Or in the middle of the morning. I guess they had a lot of skirmishes during the middle of the morning. And when he came and visited us this particular time, after about a week, we got used to it. There he was running through the backyard, running through the neighborhood. My uncle had to go to his neighbors and say, this is how he's been since he's been back from combat. He's not going to hurt you. If he runs through your yard, just ignore him. He'll disappear. So even though we didn't know what was going on, we learned to kind of adapt to his activity. But it doesn't just affect your behavior like it does his. It can affect your health as well. It predisposes you for cardiovascular diseases, for diabetes, and for inflammation. And there are a lot of disease processes nowadays that have a root cause of inflammation. There are some risk factors to PTSD, traumatic experience, maybe if there's pre-existing emotional conditions, a lot of stress in your life, maybe if you have an inadequate amount of support from people in your life, or previous trauma. And then going back to the military side, in 2012, there were more deaths in military people from taking their own lives than from in combat. And 20% of the lives taken by oneself in this life, I can't say certain words online, are from military personnel who have been in combat. And in the last 10 years, taking one's life has been greatly on the rise with military people. So it has a lot of effect on this community. So what can we do about this? There are therapy options. These are just a few of them. There are more that are being worked on now and more that are being developed. The first one is EMDR. I can attest to this one personally. This is very effective. There was one gentleman that I knew, he had, and again, he didn't have childhood trauma or what have you, but he had been mugged out in a parking lot late at night by several men and beaten pretty badly. And he had such anxiety and stress. After 2 sessions with a therapist, he was good. He was fine. So this is very effective. If you have an underlying problem that's causing it, such as childhood stress, unwanted intimacy, things of that nature, you do also have to address the underlying problem. But at least this can take you out of the moment or keep you from going into one of these panic attacks or flashbacks. There's another one called TF, Trauma-Focused Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. We see this used a lot in children and teenagers, and this can help them to deal with these feelings. And another one called Expressive Arts Therapy. And we've probably all seen this on Lifetime, where maybe there's a child and they're with a therapist and they can't talk about some traumatic incident, but they'll draw it out in a picture and then they'll be able to talk about it. So this is one way. Again, it's used more with children than adults. And then there's another one that's phase-oriented, and it focuses on stabilizing you at different points. First of all, establishing your safety. Second of all, processing the traumatic memories. And third of all, recognition and integration into daily life. There are things that can help you on a daily level to deal with this, such as having support from other people and being around other people even when you don't feel like it. Sometimes that's when you have to push yourself to be around people the most, is when you're fighting it the most, because you could be slipping into that place. Also, exercise is a huge stress reliever, so it takes down these instances. Being in the moment and not zoning out, but being present with everything that you're doing and focusing. Some people have found journaling, lifestyle, what we eat. They are finding in the last few years that what we eat directly affects our mood and our mental status. And last but definitely 100% not least is counseling. And I know not everyone feels this way, but we still have prevalence with, we're embarrassed to have a problem. If you go and break your leg, let's say, and go to the doctors and have a cast put on, who's going to feel strange about doing that? No one. You wouldn't think twice about it. But if it's a problem that has anything to do with your mind, well, that's part of your body. And there's no shame in fixing a problem with your mind versus fixing a problem with your body. And I once heard a therapist say, if you don't deal with your problems are going to deal with you. And who wants to live that way? So if you have experienced this, because a lot of people experience it, especially people who have been through traumas, and most people have nowadays. We live in a very serious age nowadays. And people who have not been through any traumatic experiences, you are in that happy 1%, God bless you. But most of us, we live in a perilous world, and we will go through something. And if you have a loved one or you yourself experience this, there are things you can do. You can help a person in your life who has this by, first of all, encouraging them to get help. And that's not just going to therapy, but also praying. God will help lead you, but he also expects us to take advantage of resources that are out there. He has put these things out there for us, and we need to take advantage of them. You can share them you can encourage them to share openly with them and not be ashamed of these feelings. Ask them what their triggers, what sets them off, so that you can be of assistance, maybe help them avoid them, see if they're going into that place and know how to bring them out. And just ask them what makes them feel better. Be a good friend to this person when they struggle. So I hope any one of you that may be experiencing this, don't feel ashamed of this. Reach out there, get help. It is something that can go away, and not the same treatment works for everyone, but one of them will work for you. Thank you.